الحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Glory be to Allah, all praise to Allah. There is no God but Allah. Allah is great.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to another episode in True Peace, The Secret of Life. And in this series, we have been looking at the world's fastest growing religion and the most sustainable faith or belief system in the entire universe. And we've been looking how Islam is not just based on one concept alone, and if you pull that one concept out, the whole of Islam falls apart. It's not a religion like a religion of other cultures in the world, where it is dependent on one thing. Islam is dependent on many things. There's the Sharia, there is the belief in Allah, there's the belief in the Day of Judgment, there's social structures, there's so much that makes up Islam. And this is what makes Islam practical in our day-to-day existence. It's not just a faraway, pie-in-the-sky type of religion. It's a real down here on the earth, day-to-day living religion, or belief system, as we prefer to say. So the Islamic framework is made up of many tiers or many levels. And so far we've looked at the hope structure that we find in Islam. What do we hope for? What do we believe in? What is it that we want? And what is that we need out of life? We've also looked at the educational structure, the spiritual structure, the morality structure, and the way that we deal with people on our day-to-day basis, the way we deal with business and economics. We've looked at human responsibility in Islam, how we are responsible both to all that we see in existence, as well as we are responsible to worship Allah. So we have to have a balance in all that we do in life. And last time, we looked basically at the family structure. There's so much more that we could have gone into, but we just kept it simple for the sake of an introduction to Islam, to show that Islam deals with all facets of life. And we said that the family structure, if it gets done properly and it is run smoothly, then it is the best thing that we could possibly have. But if the family structure falls apart, well, then it is a nightmare. And many of us in society today have very bad family structures. So you're not alone, it happens. But we gave the solution for success. What is the recipe that we can use to resolve the family structure and put it back into place so that we can fix it up so that we don't have problems in the future? Remember, when we do fix-ups, we're not talking about putting a little bit of polyfiller in a wall. We're talking about taking the whole wall down and building it again. When we look at the religion of Islam, or when we look at submitting to Allah, we need to understand that when we enter into Islam, there is a number of processes that need to take place. And this is why today we are going to be looking at the social structure of Islam, the interaction that we have as human beings with one another. It's very similar to what we dealt with last time, talking about the family structure, but today we are talking about the greater family, the social structure within Islam. And humans are not made as solitary creatures. Humans have been made to be interdependent upon each other. We have different types of dependencies. We have economic dependencies. We have sexual dependencies. We have protection dependencies. We need our government to look after us. We need the police force to make sure that we will be safe. We need to make sure that we also support the military and the police and whatever other services protects our country or our homes. We have dependencies on each other. We have dependencies of being social creatures, and we have the need to be dependent on structures in our society. These make up who we are as human beings. But when we enter into Islam, there is a process that we need to go through. And this is very important. In fact, I should have said this right in the beginning of the series. When you enter into Islam, you have to think of Islam in the way an architect does when he is about to plan a building. When he goes to the drawing board for the first time, he first goes to quantity surveyors. He goes to people who will look at the earth that the building is going to be built on. They will take core samples. They take this machine and they dig a hole into the ground and they look at the different levels. They take a glass tube or a perspex tube and they can see all the different components that make up the soil that is underneath it. Maybe they'll find that some of the soil is just very, very loose sand. A little bit further down, they'll find that it becomes clay. A little bit further down, they'll find rocks and stones and tin. And then further down, they will find solid bedrock. That's what's good news for them. The minute they find bedrock, they're very excited. Think about places where there is not such good soil. What they have to do is they have to drive these big poles into the ground and fill them up with bedrock and cement and all things before they can even start building, because the earth is very, very poor. And the life expectancy of buildings like that is not very long, maybe 100 years, and then they'll have to maybe take it down or rebuild the whole building. But places that are very strong, that is good news for someone who is going to be an architect and design a building. When we are interested in becoming Muslims, we take core samples. We send out quantity surveyors. And this we do ourselves. We don't send somebody else out to do it, but we do it ourselves. We don't just go into Islam and say, okay, I'm going to follow blindly, because we know from previous experiences with other religions that they are not built on solid ground. And so we do our own quantity surveying. We look at the ground, we go, Islam is not just one facet. It's made up of many different structures. And then we have a look, maybe we take a core sample, and we have a look and go, wow, that really appeals to me. When we come into Islam, we don't just build on what we already had. We need to dig up all the rubbish that we had before. We need to take out all the loose sand. We need to take out all the tin cans and all the garbage that has been laid there over the years. And we need to find the bedrock. And when we find that bedrock, we lay down a brand new foundation. And the basic foundation of Islam is the belief in Allah, that there is no other God worthy of worship other than Allah, that He is self-sufficient, that He has no partners, that He doesn't go through mood swings, that He doesn't have human requirements or needs, that He doesn't live within our space and time and shapes and forms that we have, that He is beyond understanding, but not so far that we don't understand anything about Allah, because we have the explanations that we find within the pages of the Hadith and the Quran, which give us the attributes of Allah. But this is what we build our foundation on. Once that foundation is built, then we can start building the building. And so when we look at Islam as a social structure, we understand that you cannot build a social structure unless you have a firm foundation. Once that firm foundation is built, you can start adding the other structures in place, which we sometimes refer to as the pillars of Islam: fasting, praying, giving to the poor, going on Hajj, understanding who Allah is. These are all the pillars, but the basic foundation is Tawheed. Understanding who Allah is actually our foundation. And we build everything on top of that. Then we can only start having a social structure. Because if we don't understand who Allah is and say we just pray, then who are we praying to? We're just wasting our time. We have to understand who Allah is, otherwise our prayers are pointless. Then we can build our spiritual life stronger. If we're fasting during the month of Ramadan, but we're not praying and we don't know who Allah is, we're again just going to become very, very anorexic. We're not going to gain anything from it. Again, if we just go on Hajj and we just want to say, well, I've done my Hajj, and we can tick it off and say, well, I've done that, and you don't pray and you don't fast during the month of Ramadan and you don't know who Allah is, it's a waste of time. You see, all of these things have to be put together. So our social structure depends on us first having all those other things in place first. And then we build our family. Once when our family is on top of these pillars and on top of the basic foundation, then we can start looking outside our front door. So in a way, we've built our home over the last few weeks that we've done this series. We've been putting the walls up, we've been putting the wall in, we've been putting the door in, we're putting the windows in, we put the furniture in, we built the nice support structures that we've had in place. We put the family structure in place. Now we can open the front door because we've done all the things that are required to have an Islamic life. and we walk outside and the next person that we see is our neighbor. And that's where our social structure begins. Having a secure foundation, having a secure building allows us to have a secure social structure outside of that building that we have spent so many weeks looking into and building. The formula for a successful social structure, a formula for a successful community is to have knowledge with right action, to have knowledge of the world that we are about to go into. Because the minute we go out into this world, we looked at last time how destroyed this world is. We looked at the divorce rate, we looked at teen pregnancies, we looked at suicide rates, all these terrible statistics. That's the world that you're about to exit into. That's the social structure that we are going to enter into. Unless you are prepared as a Muslim for that social structure with knowledge and right actions, then you will not be successful. To be successful, you must have knowledge and right actions when you move out into this new world. So if we think of the recipe for success or the ideology that we are required to have to be good in the social structure of Islam is to have understanding of what happens in this world and belief in the world to come and belief in who we are as Muslims. You see, sometimes we don't believe what we say. We teach people to believe in the hereafter, but we ourselves don't believe in the hereafter. We have to believe in what we are talking about. In other words, we have to practice what we preach. We have to have an understanding of what the world believes. This is why comparative study is so important. You know, some people will say, I don't think it's necessary to study comparative religion. We don't need to do comparative study. Isn't it just becoming argumentative? You know, when people like Dr. Zakir Naik, Sheikh Ahmed Didat, all these comparative guys, aren't they just arguing? Isn't that something that we shouldn't be doing in Islam? No, you need comparative study. You need to understand comparative studies in all its forms. Not just comparative religion, but comparative politics, comparative psychology, comparative sciences. You need to understand of all these things. As a Muslim, you have to know more than any other human being because you're having to defend your faith, because Islam is not just about the belief in God. It's also the economic system. It's our social system. There's so much that makes up Islam that we have to be a specialist in almost every field. And it can be tough and it can be difficult, but you have to have a comparative study background. And if you don't have a comparative background, then you'll find it very, very difficult. So you need to find out in your area, in your city, in your community, is there a comparative study course available for you? If there is a comparative study course, sign up immediately. You need it. Well, it's time for us to take a break, and when we get back from the break, we'll continue, inshallah.
All praise to Allah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Peace TV English, the solution for humanity.
An evil is approaching. A gap has appeared in the barrier of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, like this. This is part of a hadith that was spoken over 1400 years ago. And if it was near then, imagine how near it is now. My name is Muhammad Tim Humble, and in this series we explore the hadith of Sahih Muslim that speak of the trials and tribulations that are to come in the end of days.
Know and understand the signs of the final day to increase your taqwa and protect your iman in end of days. Next on Peace TV.
All praise to Allah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back. In Islam, we have the understanding that science and religion actually work together. So as social beings, when we are representing Islam, there are some things that we find that are cohabitable, that these things can coexist with each other. We find that the majority of Muslims would prefer to get into things like sciences when they go to university, where you find that many Christians choose not to get into sciences because they find that the sciences disagree with their religion. So you'll find that many Muslims will get into economics, they will get into law, they will get into medicine, they will get into research, they'll get into engineering, things like that, because their religion already agrees with those things. But imagine the poor Christian who's going and studying sciences, and he finds that his sciences are disagreeing with everything his book says. Imagine the person who's studying law, and he's a Christian, and he finds that the law that he's studying opposes everything that his book says. Because law says there has to be justice. For every action, there's a reaction. If you commit a murder, you must go to jail. But according to the Bible, every murderer should be set free because all his sins are already nailed to the cross, according to Christianity. So he has conflicts. So our social structure in Islam makes so much more sense. I mean, this is why we can be social beings, why you'll find us in the leaders of those fields, in economics, in politics, in law and order. So we find that in Islam, the social structure of Islam makes so much more sense. In Islam, we understand that the physical laws and the moral laws are extremely important and need to work together. So what are these physical laws? The physical laws, we have a mind and a body. The physical body has to learn, it has to survive, it has to gain an education, it has to be fed. Our minds need to learn it, and our minds never stop learning. All the time we are picking up little things. Sometimes we can be picking up subliminal things. Imagine behind me now, there might be a picture on the wall. There might be a sign on the wall that your brain is actually picking up. And you don't even realize that it's picking up because the mind is continuously looking for something to feed on, to eat on. And so this is the same as our physical body. It continuously wants to be fed. But if we look at the other side, because now this is the physical laws, if we look at the moral laws or the spiritual laws or the belief laws that we have a spirit. And that spirit wants to serve. It wants to be obedient. It naturally wants to submit to God. You don't have to tell people Tawheed. You just have to take somebody and say, listen, forget everything you've ever been taught. Forget all the stuff that you ever heard. Explain to me, like I did in Germany. In Germany, I went to a group of atheists. I spoke at a university. And believe it or not, a group of atheists at the university invited me to come to Germany. It wasn't the Muslims who invited me, the atheists did. Maybe it's because I write things against Christianity, but whatever reason was. But I think as well they were trying to trap me. When I came there at the university, I started my usual talk to give about Islam, to give the message of Islam. And I saw about 10 minutes in, I was losing everybody. People were switching off. They were on their mobile phones. They were not interested. This was about religion. I didn't expect this guy to come talk about religion. We're not interested. We are all atheists. It's an atheist society. We don't want anything to do with religion. So I stopped. And I gave out a piece of paper to each of those. There's about 100 people there from the atheist society. And I said to him, okay, let's stop. I want you to take a pen and paper, and I want you to break up into 10 groups of 10. And I want you to write down 10 things to have a perfect society in the world that everybody will agree with. Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, agnostics. Remember, you want to have everybody believing exactly the same thing. You don't want to have disagreements. So you can't write down everybody needs to believe in Krishna because the Christians won't. Everybody must believe in Buddha because the Hindus won't. So you have to write down 10 things to have a perfect system in the world. What would be the 10 things that you would have a perfect society? Think of politics, think of economics, think of education, think of everything you want. And so they broke into these 10 groups, and about a half an hour later, I pulled them all together because they had to argue, because each of them were arguing, this has to be an absolute truth for the whole of humanity. And then I made those 10 groups go back all together, and representatives of each of those 10 groups to sit together in a group. And those 10 representatives had to write down 10 things that they all agreed with, that there were going to be absolute truth for the whole of humanity. These are atheists, remember. And they came back, and one representative stood up. And before he spoke, I hadn't seen what they'd done, never done this experiment before either. It was just an experiment. And I asked this man to stand up, and I said, do you represent the whole of the group of people that he had, the 100 people? He said, yes. And I asked the people that were there, do you accept that he is going to speak as a representative for all 100 of you, and will you agree with what he's about to say? And they all looked at me and I said, you have to agree, but otherwise he's not permitted to speak. And then they looked and they said, okay, and they spoke to their representative from the 10 groups, and the representative nodded his head and he said, yes, he speaks for us. And they all said, yes, we agree. I said, there's no one who's in opposition. No. Read me the first thing on your list. He said, the first thing has to do with religion. I said, fine. But you're atheists. How come you have a religion? He said, the only way to resolve the world's problem is for us to have one religion and allow people to believe in that religion, but the religion has to have very, very strict conditions. I said, what is the first condition? He says, we have to believe that there are no other gods except one God. And I looked at the man and I thought, you've just done dawah to yourself. But I didn't say anything. Even now when I think of it, I feel like I want to tear up with the revelation that this man came for himself. And I said, what is the second thing that you came up with? And he said, the second thing we decided is that the legal system has to be changed in the world, because we are putting people in jail. We are paying for them to stay in jail. We are helping them to become bigger criminals. And the jail system that we have today doesn't work. It's failing. It doesn't work for anybody. It is the worst system in the world. And I said, well, what will your solution be? And they said, we have to have a stricter system. We have to have much stricter policies. No jail time. If a person does something wrong, he must be sentenced and sent home, so it doesn't become a crippled society. Do you know what? I'm not going to go into all the details. We're going to go off the topic here. All 10 points that they raised in that group were Islamic points. This is what we're going through in this system that we are talking about, the structures that make up Islam. They wrote this lecture. They wrote the system of this talk that I'm giving to you today. Because that group of atheists did dawah to themselves. Of that group, 9 of them reverted to Islam. They all did dawah. I didn't have to tell them about Islam. They told me about Islam. So you see, our spirit hungers for truth. It will find it by itself. It will search it out and find it, even if you call yourself an atheist. These were not agnostics. These were people that were so hardcore that they could say, because what does an atheist say? He says, I can prove to you that there is no God. So these were people who actually believed that they could prove there was no God. And out of them, a group of them became Muslims. And they're not just once-off Muslims, they're still Muslims today. That was over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that this happened in Germany. So they did dawah to themselves. So the spirit hungers for truth. It seeks it out, no matter what people say. And then the other part of our religious body or religious laws that govern us as social beings is that our heart needs to care and have compassion and love for people. Generally, we find that in society. Generally, we find in society that people seek out love. They seek out wanting to care and be social beings. So we just looked at a very, very basic structure of what Islam says concerning who we are as human beings. How we as human beings have a desire to be a group of people who hungers, who wants to be part of a social structure. We don't want to be isolated. And if you do not feed your mind, your body, your soul, and your heart, and you deprive them, then you will no longer be a social being. And then you'll find in the mind, you'll become mentally ill. In the body, you'll become physically ill. In the spirit, you'll become spiritually ill. And in the heart, you'll lose your humanity. And this is when you see people doing degrading things to one another, or hurting animals, or hurting the environment, or hurting different structures. So we have to make sure that as social beings, and because Islam encourages us to be social beings, that we look after all 4 of these things. That we look after our minds, we look after our bodies, our spirit, and our heart. That we use them successfully. If we use these things successfully, we will find success. The secret to success in a social structure in Islam that is promoted in Islam is to feed all 4 of these things. Not leaving one out. All 4 of them need to be taken care of. All 4 of them need to be looked after in a balanced way. We must make sure that we do not get misguided. At home, wherever you are today, do what they did in Germany. If you're a doubter and you're a person who says, no, Islam, it's just another religion. It's not a religion, it's a belief system. But if you think like that, I want you to today, when we finish this program, which is almost finished, I want you to write down those things that those Germans did and see for yourself if Islam makes sense to you. Well, that's all the time we have for today's program. Until we meet again next time, same place. From me, Areeb Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Subhanallah walhamdulillah.